Dragons shouldn't be stat blocks. They should be story engines. So today I'm going to share with you 5 techniques to make your dragons unforgettable. We will cover how to build dragon mythology that makes your world feel alive, how to give your dragon motivations that drive your story forward, and how to design dragon encounters that feel like climaxes, not just combat challenges. Each technique builds on the last, so stick around to get the full picture. And to make this more fun, we'll create a dragon together. Mazineria, an ancient red dragon turned tyrant, fueled by pride, grief, and the legend she became. This video is part of Monster Week, a community event created by Ginny and Pointy Hat. Thanks guys. Celebrating all things monstrous. And this year's theme? Well, you guessed it. Dragons. Dragons are cool. Dragons are life. So let's do this. Think about the most memorable villains in any great story. Their reputation always precedes them. Their influence is felt long before they physically appear. This is the power of cultural integration. And it is the first technique we will use in our dragon design. As you crest the hill, you see the village of Embervale. The rooftops have peculiar red clay tiles arranged in scale-like patterns. In the town square, a weathered shrine stands, not to any god, but to the Protector. A local festival is underway, with children wearing crimson masks, leaving small offerings of copper and spice at the base of a mountain mural. When asking about the mountain, the villagers grow quiet, explaining that
she who watches
requires respect before her name is spoken. The party hasn't seen the dragon yet, but we've already established 3 things. The dragon has historical significance to the region. There's an ambiguous relationship, fear mixed with reverence. And the dragon has a presence even when physically absent. This is how you make your players obsessed with finding out what happened. They experience the dragon's reputation organically through the world itself. To use this technique, start teasing the dragon's presence 3 to 5 sessions before the players ever see it. Create conflicting accounts about the dragon's nature and influence, and build cultural touchpoints. Festivals, superstitions, and local customs tied to the dragon. But what happens when my players ignore these hints or rush straight to fighting the dragon? Well, players will always surprises, and that's what makes D&D so special. And it's also why I created the Plot Engineering Blueprint. It's a free guide that helps you make your dragons, and your entire campaign, actually, resilient to any player choice. You can download it right now using the link in the description. So far, we've hinted at the dragon's presence, which is cool, but shouldn't it, physically manifest in the world as well? Think about how an apex predator shapes its environment. Did you know wolves change river paths by affecting deer behavior? Now, imagine a creature that's not just an apex predator, but a force of nature and magic, one that has existed in a region for centuries. I call this environmental influence. What if your dragon was not just a single creature, but an ecosystem unto itself? Its magical nature, its elemental affinity, its very presence reshaping the world around it. As you venture closer to the mountain, you notice strange changes in the landscape. The streams run uncommonly warm and smell faintly of sulfur. Vegetation grows in strange crimson patterns, as if following unseen ley lines. Local miners speak of fire elementals appearing in deeper tunnels, growing more numerous in recent months. At night, the mountain silhouette seems to pulse with an inner glow, like slow breathing. To create effective environmental influence in your own campaign, you could create regional effects that match your dragon's type and personality, establish political structures influenced by the dragon's presence, and introduce supernatural manifestations that grow stronger as players approach their dragon's domain. That last point is especially important because it will create a sense of escalating tension. The closer your players get to the dragon, the more its influence distorts the natural order. But something is still missing. How do we make the players truly care about confronting this dragon? So, you know how hurricanes have names? I always thought we fear named storms because we kind of attribute intent to them. And I think monsters in D&D can work in the same way. A dragon without purpose is just a dangerous animal, but a dragon with ambition becomes a narrative force. I call this technique narrative agency. It's how you transform your dragon from an obstacle to a character. Deep within the Forgotten Library, you uncover ancient texts speaking of the Burning Throne, a primordial fire entity sealed beneath the mountain ages ago. The texts suggest Medzenaria was once bound to guard this prison, but recent evidence indicates she's now attempting to awaken this entity. Local cults have formed, gathering magical artifacts they believe will help complete a ritual. Some followers believe this will bring prosperity. Others fear it marks the beginning of a fiery apocalypse. These aren't just plot details. They're story possibilities. This goal transforms our dragon from a static threat to an active character with a motivation that extends beyond simple aggression, a plan that creates timeline pressure for the players, a history that explains why this dragon is different from others. So, to use narrative agency efficiently in your own campaign, create a goal that connects to your dragon's core nature. Design multiple ways for players to discover and understand this goal, and create opportunities for players to impact the dragon's plans before the final confrontation. This isn't about restricting player freedom. It's about creating meaning. When players intercept a cultist carrying a ritual component, or, maybe even unwittingly help the dragon by removing an ancient ward, they become part of the dragon's story, rather than just its slayers. Okay, so far we have this growing presence, even goals. But if our dragon is to be treated as a character, what's her personality? People have personalities, right? Ever noticed how we form opinions on celebrities before even meeting them? Through stories, interviews, and media, we develop a sense of who they are. And if we finally see them in person, that preformed impression colors everything we experience. The same principle can apply to legendary creatures in your world. The way people speak about your dragon should reveal its personality before players ever face it directly. This technique, let's call it character echoes, builds anticipation while establishing key traits that will make eventual interaction far more meaningful. In the Border Town's tavern, you meet Thorn, a grizzled ranger who survived an encounter with Medzenaria 50 years ago.
She doesn't simply attack. She judges. Asked me 3 questions before deciding if I lived or died. Why I entered her territory, what I regretted most in life, and what I would sacrifice to continue living. She said my answers amused her enough to let me leave with a reminder of our meeting.
He lowers his voice.
She remembers names across generations. My grandfather once traded with her. She recited our family tree better than I could.
Here we learned that the dragon has intelligence and personality beyond typical monsters. And of course, she's a dragon. There are patterns and rules to her behavior that can be learned, and she has history that extends beyond the current campaign. Maybe your players gather even more information. You discover a forgotten journal written by a Mountain Kingdom advisor. It describes Medzenaria's centuries-long relationship with the kingdom, first as protector, then advisor, and finally as a feared tyrant. The entries reveal how her pride grew alongside her power, but also mentions her fascination with poetry and riddles, suggesting that appealing to her intellectual vanity might provide an opening. To use this technique effectively, I suggest you create NPCs who have first-hand experience with a dragon. Then you develop consistent personality traits that inform potential interactions. And finally, you provide insight into potential weaknesses or alternative approaches. This technique doesn't just build atmosphere, although it does that, but it also gives players actionable information they can use to plan their approach. Will they attempt to appease the dragon's vanity? Challenge its pride? These become meaningful choices rather than simple combat tactics. But speaking of combat, after all this build-up, how do we make that final confrontation truly memorable? Because you still gotta slay the dragon, right? So let me ask you, what's the difference between a random bar brawl and the climactic duel at the end of a great film? Both are fights, right? But one has emotional weight, context, and consequences that resonate beyond the physical confrontation itself. I call this technique climactic framing, and it transforms your dragon encounter from a stats-based challenge into a memorable story moment. This technique is about designing your dragon encounter like a movie's third act, with environmental storytelling, meaningful objectives beyond combat, and phases that escalate tension. It's where everything you've built around your dragon finally pays off. As you enter Metaneria's sanctum, you find not just a dragon awaiting, but an active ritual unfolding. Ancient artifacts circle a central dais where molten stone bubbles. The chamber walls bear carvings of her history, first as protector, then as tyrant. Cultists in familiar crimson masks chant at elemental fonts while the dragon focuses on a pulsing seal. The massive chamber offers multiple levels, connected by stone bridges, with the ceiling opening to a volcanic shaft hundreds of feet high. Meteneria turns, eyes gleaming with ancient intelligence. Before you die, tell me what you regret most about coming here. You recognize the judgment question from the survivor's tale, even as you notice children's offerings from Amber Vale, arranged precisely around her ritual components. Here's what makes this effective. The environment tells a story through its design, showcasing her transformation from protector to tyrant. The scene includes multiple elements beyond just a dragon. Cultists wearing the same mask seen in villages, ritual components incorporating attributes. The dragon actively displays the personality traits established earlier, asking the judgment questions survivors mentioned. And the space creates dramatic opportunities for both a dragon and players without negating anyone's abilities. To create your own climactic dragon encounter, design the environment to reflect both your dragon's nature and history, with artifacts from their past and evidence of their changing relationship with the world. You include personal elements that emotionally connect to earlier discoveries, with items from villages, symbols players have seen before, that kind of stuff. You create dramatic decision points that force meaningful choices beyond just attack or defend. You incorporate specific callbacks to stories and information players gathered throughout the campaign, and you ensure players can influence the outcome in ways that reflect their understanding of the dragon, not just their combat abilities. But what if my players just want, challenging combat? So maybe this is a controversial take, but in role-playing game, there's game, sure, the tactical aspect is important, but there's also role. The story, narrative aspect can make the tactical moments feel even more intense. These techniques enhance combat by creating emotional investment. Imagine players discovering that, the dragon is vulnerable during certain phases of its ritual. Local materials have dragon-resistant properties due to centuries of adaptation. Maybe the dragon's lair contains unstable magical elements that create environmental hazards or advantages. It could be this, or 1,000 other different things you have either planned or improvised as a result of your players' actions. But I'm a firm believer, even the most die-hard tactical players will enjoy a tough fight even more if it's anchored in a cool story. Remember, dragons deserve to be more than just another monster. They give the game its name for a reason. Treat them like characters, not just challenges. Give them influence, lore, personality, goals, and let them haunt your players long before combat starts. But now you might be thinking, this dragon is going to be amazing, but how do I actually roleplay her when my players finally meet her? How do I deliver that judgment question from the Survivor's Tale? How do I convey her ancient intelligence and pride? Creating an epic dragon is one thing, but bringing her to life through compelling roleplay is what will truly make the encounter unforgettable. So click on this video next to discover the difference between good and bad roleplay, and I will show you how small, subtle changes to your approach can transform every character interaction without requiring any special acting talent.